Misha here, and do you want to talk about the Daewoo again? You know you do. Because of all the SNT motive, SNT defense, SNT USA talk. Now, early this year, I did kind of a historical look back and a little bit of a mechanical breakdown of the two Daewoos that we've got. K1A, Max 1 here, and K2, Max 2. Obviously, these are pre-band. There's also the post-band DR200 and DR300. Not to mention the pistols, the K5, the DP51, which are actually very important to what we're going to talk about. That's all what we've already kind of covered. This video, I want to talk about, was I right or wrong? Because I had a couple of commenters said that video was going to age like milk. Has my previous video, when I was skeptical about new Daewoos coming in, are they here? What's the latest news? I want to share with you what I know. That's the problem with current news type videos. They're out of date the minute you post them, even before. I'll do my best. I also want to talk about how the Daewoo's doing in South Korean ROK, Army, and for that matter, Navy, Air Force service today. K1A1 still around? K2 still around? If so, what do they look like now? If not, what's replacing them? So a bit of an update to my past video as of November 2025. I guess you could say this is a bit of a two-part Thanksgiving special, although this one's more of a wishful thinking than Thanksgiving video, perhaps. Very quickly, just to get this out of the way. The K1A and its derivatives. This is the direct impingement, or if you prefer, internal piston gun with retractable 3-position shoulder stock, AR pattern rotating bolt, originally chambered for 223-556 with a 1 in 12 twist, and classed as a submachine gun. So it's pretty close to an AR in a lot of ways, but still pretty unique. Plus, they figured out the whole buffer tube issue back in the early 80s. So that's not the Daewoo most people think of, because they think of the K2 pattern here, folding stocking and no buffer tube. This is the long stroke gas piston style. Still has a rotating bolt. Still has a lot to do with the AR, including taking the same mags, but it borrows more heavily from the AK and the HK and even the FNC and Galil, if you want to look at it that way. And while the early versions were a 1 in 12 twist, more recent versions, starting in the late 80s, had the 1 in 7.35 inch twist. Obviously a much longer barrel. This was the rifle as such, an infantry rifle. They built over 600,000 of these, many for domestic, some for export use. And it looks like production numbers for the K1, K1A series, around 180,000, because these were always used as a submachine gun type weapon. So I just wanted to say that right away. Direct impingement, internal piston, external piston, long stroke style with the K2. Got it? Cool. These are the same two Daewoos you've seen in several videos of mine. So I don't have any new guns. Why am I doing a new video? Well, it has to do with SNT Defense in January 2025, their SHOT Show promises and showing off. It really got them back in the spotlight. And, well, those who know, fine, but SNT Motive is the current owner of Daewoo. A new kitten notwithstanding. Come say hi to the people. Here you go. No new guns, but new kitten that showed up when it got cold. Say hi. Somehow she knows she's being looked at. So yeah, Peanut's got a little sister. What was I saying? Basically, SNT bought out Daewoo. Daewoo goes back. It was originally the Army Arsenal and Development back in the 70s. Daewoo Precision Industry started in 81. Actually, really their first major project was making this, the original K1, K1A. They actually didn't get into cars because every time you do a Daewoo video, someone always makes a car joke. They didn't actually start doing that till the mid-80s. So the guns came first. So this came around 80, 81. And the K2 series, they had a small initial run in 82 with the full rate production by 84, 85 and military service a year or two later. And then, of course, you also get the K5 pistol in 1989 and a few other things besides. That's how I got going. But in 1999, like a lot of post-Cold War military contractors and companies and manufacturers, there was restructuring, and essentially the parent Daewoo company over Daewoo Precision went out of business. So you had a brief time where the Daewoo Precision was kind of on their own, but around 2006, SNT Motiv started buying interest in Daewoo as a firearms manufacturer, and by 2012, they basically had it all. This is when you had the SNT Daewoo kind of combo, soon to be just SNT Motiv by 2020. And what we're dealing with in Las Vegas potentially is SNT Defense, which is basically a trade name under SNT USA Incorporated, which, yes, is still under the parent SNT Motiv, SNT holding company out of South Korea. Confused yet? Good, because that's part of the purpose of this video. I want to show you all the steps we're getting into and also explain why the current guns would effectively be Daewoo's, or at the very least modern day successors to the Daewoo. It's the same factory, just different names, different ownership, different management. So what did they promise, mention, show off 9 months ago? I guess nearly 10 months ago now. Essentially a return to the market. They said after a good long while, Daewoos are back. Now, obviously select fires were always restricted here, but in the 80s, these came in. Stoeger was the first large-scale importer doing the Max 2 here, and the Max 1 or Maxi here. And they would also evolve into the names of K1A1 and K2 respectively. Around 87, the Stoegers seem to be 84, 85. The 87, IAC took over importation, keeping the K1A1 name and K2 name for a minute, and then switching over to AR100 and AR110C. And those were really the last of the pre-bans because, as we know, February, March of 1989, an executive order effectively banned importation of such guns. So that's it for the pre-ban woos. Not many came in. A few thousand of the twos, and some estimates put, and these are only estimates, 1,500 of the K1 types. Not many. That said, for years, the K1s sold for less money because they were simply less desirable. As we already talked about, this is not a gas piston gun. It's a direct impingement. And I think it just, because of the barrel situation, it didn't appeal to people as much. They all wanted the full-length K2 here. And luckily, in 1990, a ban-compliant version did come out. Imported by B West and later Kimber, the DR200 and 5.56, and the brief run, only done by Kimber as far as I know, DR300 and 760-39, were this same gun, but it had a thumbhole stock, either a non-threaded muzzle or a muzzle cap, no bayonet lug. You know the dealio, but they still took standard mags. And these would come in, some sources say up through 1996, some say 98, mid to late 90s, but then the rules changed again, and really it was the magwell that was getting them in trouble by 98. And I think because of the restructuring over in South Korea, it was just getting harder to bring them over anyway. I should also just mention the K5 pistol, again introduced in '89, was exported under the DP51 name, and it was imported by Kimber and B West and a few others. I think even Century Arms brought over some, but those could have been surplus. I don't remember if they were brand new. In being a pistol, they weren't near as restrictive, although they weren't able to come over with magazines over 10 rounds after September of 1994, because then we had the U.S. national federal level assault weapons ban. My point is, by 2000, 2005, they're all gone. All the woos are gone. And the company is really in no position to even try to send them over. For one thing, the assault weapons ban just makes it hard until it ends at the end of '04. For another, they're still going through all their corporate restructuring and troubles. What do you do? So for well over 25 years, we did not have them in America. That's one reason folks are kind of excited about the SHOT Show announcements. And that basically included 4 guns that were talked about. 2 we've seen before, 2 potentially very first time to the market. Obviously, they were going to do a K2, now known as the K2S. And while it would be similar to this gun, it would actually be based on the modern K2C1, which is an updated version of this. The South Korean military has about 600,000 of those. Their whole armed forces, they have over 600,000 active with 2 million reserve. Having North Korea as a neighbor will do that to you. This was the original version here. 18.3-inch barrel, as like I said earlier, 1 in 12 originally, 1 in 7.3. It's threaded half by 28 with a unique muzzle device, flash hider. Kind of a fun fact, back when these were coming in, a lot of folks thought this was put on wrong because it is canted to the side. No, that is how it's done for compensation. We do have a 4-way gas regulator. Essentially small, medium, and large port sizes plus off. And it too is meant to be canted. More than once, people tried to put it upright and went to shoot it and blew it out their front, losing a valuable part. Even though these were built using know-how and from a Colt factory, because Korea did make the KM603, basically the Colt M16A1. They made several 100,000 of those in the 70s. By the 80s, they were doing their own thing here. Colt tried to sue them, yes, they didn't go anywhere. But they take their own proprietary parts. That's another reason folks are excited here. Things like the hand guards, the pistol grip, and obviously this folding stock, very much proprietary. Really, but the only AR parts they directly take are the magazines, although the trigger groups are close enough. I've known people get AR groups to work in them without much trouble. We still have a reciprocating charging handle. We do, from the very get-go, have rail mounts on top of the K2, although the K1 here, it does not. Mostly for its role and the fact that it came out a little earlier. Anyway, this is the original 80s version that served really up until about 2012, 2014, and then they started updating it. SNT considered the original K1 and K2 outdated, and there were efforts to replace them, at least the idea. There was the funky KX8 bullpup, there was the K11 dual barrel. They eventually just decided, you know what, the gun is good, it just needs some new features. So you have like the Warrior program, and then around 2014, 2015, you get the K2A and the K2C, basically a carbine version. And then that was standardized on the K2C1 by 2016, and they would get about 250,000 updated of these, allowing the older ones that haven't been updated to kind of cycle the second-line troops and reserves and whatnot. But the frontline guns, the bones are the same. But now we have a quad rail forearm, which stretches over to take advantage of these top mounts for a rail. Oftentimes a new pistol grip, sometimes a new selector, and a new shoulder stock. The C1 style is more of a 5-position adjustable, collapsible very much inspired by Magpul and what have you. And of course, nowadays, part of the kit these are issued with features a red dot sight. So the K2S, talked about by SNT USA, SNT Defense, is a semi-automatic version of the C1. How are they going to get around the import ban? The one from 89 is still active, even if the one from 94, the assault weapons ban, is, it timed out. The idea is to import components, receivers, perhaps barrels, although recent changes to import regs may make getting Korean barrels in easier. Bring over parts and then source U.S.-made components for 922R. The furniture is mentioned, and I'm sure the magazine, because that counts as 3. I don't rightly know how many caliber parts are on this for 922R, probably 6 or 7. If you know, let me know. I never really paid attention. But the mag would help with half of it, and then so if you had U.S.-made stock, grip, and forearm, and muzzle device, you could get there. They also talked about doing the DP51 pistol, the K5 pistol again. That actually would be pretty easy. There are not that many restrictions on true pistol imports. And then they mentioned 2 guns that we've never had before. The K13 is potentially a semi-automatic. That is the potential replacement for the K1 we'll talk about in a minute. And then the K14, which is a bolt-action 7.62 NATO. And that's also quite likely because there aren't that many restrictions on bolt-action imports. Yeah, most of the U.S.'s import restrictions focus directly on self-loading, semi-automatic, magazine-fed rifles. Even pistols aren't near as restricted, so that's why a lot of the imports you see come in as a quote-unquote pistol, like the Swiss guns from JDI San Imports. Those are the 4 core guns. But people were speculating, maybe we'll see K1A1s come back, and this and that and other. And the guys at the SHOT Show were just kind of saying, yeah, maybe. I don't. Yeah, sometimes, you can lead the witness, as it were, and sometimes I saw that in the SHOT Show coverage. Now, one other thing that kind of excited people, they were saying, oh, we're going to at least see some guns by Q3, Q4 of 2025. Well, we're definitely in Q4 of that now, more than halfway through it even. And also prices. Now, to be fair, SNT never gave a firm price, but $1,200 was kind of a number originally batted about. And there were some reps at the booth that were like, oh yeah, we can do it for $1,200. My reaction was, really? Can ya? Well, we'll see. But, talking about the K2 here, I want to talk about the accessories in military service. After all, hundreds of thousands of these have served, and the current K2C1, it's the same core gun. There's very little internal changing. It's just new furniture. And it still retains the same barrel and same Stanag NATO spec bayonet lug here. Originally, late 60s, early 70s, the U.S. gave 16,000 M7 type bayonets to South Korea to go with their M16, and then they would soon gear up and make the KM7 themselves. Now this is just a Colt branded one here, but it'll show you. I don't believe these guns shipped with bayonets in the 80s from Stoger or IAC, but I could be wrong. The DR200s did not have lugs. See, it fits perfectly. Fun fact, the threads on a K2 are slightly longer. They're still half by 28 type threads, but the length of the pitch itself is a little bit longer than on a M16 type. So they made the KM7 bayonet. More recently, they did make an A2 version with some updated features like newer style grips. From the outset, both had a standard AR-15, M16 spec, M4 spec, Stanag magwell with mag catch and mag compatibility. And since Korea had manufactured the M16A1, not to mention had some given to them, they had magazines. Early on, they used US-made alloy mags, the shorter ones and the standard size, just kind of depending, and those would filter over to the Daewoos. But when Korea started making them, their mags in the 80s went to a steel body. They were still essentially 100% compatible with US mags and back and forth. They just went to steel versus alloy. And the finish tended to be a dark finish, basically black. I've seen black oxide. Also, some say very dark phosphating. And of course, there's different generations. Originally, they had a metal follower. Later, they would go to a polymer one for reasons that everyone does. So the Korean mag, pretty much identical, just a little bit heavier, a little bit darker in color. And they used the same mag pouch as America, 3-cell with grenade pockets. I believe this one is Korean. I have some actual Korean ones. I think I picked up a Korean one here. What have you. I don't think I have a Korean shorty pouch, but very similar style here. So 100% interchangeable there, and generally considered high-quality mags. I like the history, and I like how well made they are, and I think they're very fun to shoot. However, both of these are just 5.56 type guns. They're not any different than anything else in a lot of ways. They're unique, but not clearly superior. And as I said earlier, back in the day, people didn't really want the K1, K1A near as much as they did the K2. I always found this thing kind of endearing. Then again, I've always been a sucker for XM177 Car 15 types, and that's the genesis of this guy. In the 70s, special forces and officers and tank crews were looking for replacements for things like the M3 grease gun. And really, development of what would become the K2 began before, as far back as like 72. This really started around 76, 77, but it was a much more straightforward process because it's a little bit more of a conventional gun. And so by 1980, they had the prototype tested, and by 81, they introduced the original K1, K1A. Now, the K1A came out in 82, and really, it was just a slight update. For one thing, they added a 3-round burst option, but more importantly, they gave it a new muzzle device. The original kind of short, conical device on the K1 was just too much recoil, too much flash. They went to a new style, a little bit longer, that helped tame that. And then all the original K1s were updated to the K1A standard. What's funny is these were mostly 1 in 12 twists for quite a while. Now, some would be the 1 in 7 later on, but it wasn't until 2014 that they actually replaced all the barrels to make sure there was a 1 in 7.3 standard amongst all the K1As at the time, because they were still in service. Now, there had been efforts to replace these. In fact, it was initially announced that it was replaced in 2020 by a different gun called the DSA-R15, and that was going to go ahead, but then a year later, hello Miss Peanut, now she's joining us too, there was some corporate problems, and so that contract got canceled, and so the K1A would soldier on here. This is a light, handy little gun. Our K2 over there weighs about 8 pounds. This thing, under 6.5. And it was meant to be a submachine gun replacement more than even a carbine. Even though it fired 5.56, it has a 10.4-inch barrel. Plus you add the flash hider, gets it up to about 12. Now for our 80s imports here, they came in as rifles, so they needed to have a 16-inch barrel. Thank goodness it wasn't 18 by then. The law changed a few years earlier. So what they did was very clever. They took the flash hider and they very neatly, permanently attached it to the barrel. In fact, it's so neatly done, some folks say it's machined as part of the barrel. No, it's not. It is a separate unit when you really dig down into it. At least the ones I've seen, because I've had guys take these off before. So they pretty much have the extended style, kind of in a K1A length device. About 3 inches, I'd say. 3.5. The extension is very easy to spot on this, though. They blew it out by just about 4 inches from here to here, this little step. That's how much they extended it out to go from 12 to 16 inches. The original gun was about 33 inches with the stock fully out. And then you actually slide it in to the middle position. It's about 30 inches. And then all the way in, it's less than 26. Now on the civilian extended barrel version, it's just under 30 inches. It's called 30 inches from here to here. Then you pull your stock out and you're about 34.5, and then all the way out, 37.5. And I will say, a lot of imports get criticized for having a short length of pull. This one isn't, because it was built for special forces in South Korea, and those Marines and Navy guys over there and scout types, they're big beef eaters. 6 foot's not an uncommon height for them. So this was their dealio. And I think it's really cool we got them. Now, we never got any in the 90s because, well, it wouldn't have been practical to import this version. It was looking more dated than the K2. And what they've done is they have added rails. Like I said, they did go to new barrels, 1 and 7 twists. And then they would end up going to the K1AC1, which was an update attaching some quad rails. Sometimes they figured out a way to bolt the top rail on too. But more importantly, with the new version, they got rid of the adjustable stock, which I think is one of the most comfortable adjustable stocks. It's got a concave butt plate. It's actually checkered. And it does give you a very compact package. It's about as good as you can do. But they wanted a more modern look. So with that version, they kind of carried over the K2C1's Magpul inspired 5-position adjustable stock, putting it on using a custom made adapter to the K1A. Now, that said, so they have updated their K1As in service. They're still being used by special forces in the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, but they're on their way out. And I should also mention that some officers and tank crews and vehicle drivers still have some, secondary, like a PDW gun. Its replacement temporarily, as of 2023, was the K13. Again, one of the potential semi-automatics that SNT USA said we could see. But now there's another open competition. The K13 started to go into field testing and initial service in 2024. Has had a little bit of teething issues, but seems like it's still going ahead. They bought about 1,700 of those, but they're going to buy 16,000 new little carbines, and that's kind of where we're at with the subgun in South Korea as of 2025, as far as I know. And who could win it? It's a little up in the air. But the K13 is a very modern gun, and with the at least 2,000 probably total in service, it has some combat history coming up on it. So that's the story there. They figure by 2030 the K1A C1 will be out of service. They still have several tens of thousands knocking about. But the K2 C1, even though they've thought about replacing it, it's going to hang on for at least the foreseeable future. There's no plans to replace it. The Daewoo sling is very much the M14 late M1 Grand style with buckles. It just has a paint finish. And it typically has a metal clip. I just took the clips off these because they weren't needed. And they're in here. This is another kind of neat accessory borrowed from the M16A1. A folding light bipod. Except it does have a little bit of additional work here in the leg, if you can see. Basically, you push this plate up, and you've got yourself a bottle opener tool. I think it's neat anyway. So if you ever come across one of these, looks like it's for an M16, but just a little bit different, well, now you know. It's a ROK issue. And the bipod just clamps on to the barrel, as you'd expect. There's a cutout right here for it. Behind the swivel, behind the bayonet lug. So it'll fit the K2, but there's no provisions, just as there's not for a bayonet on the K1A type here. Neat little accessory. These used to be around everywhere for not a whole lot of coin. Just like the Woos. Kind of all used to be a fun entry-level gun that just happened to be of exceptionally high quality for what they were. This bipod's a little gummed up with Cosmo, but goes to show you. The K2 is battle tested and legendary, but it's heavy. In fact, the current C1 is even heavier by about a quarter pound than the traditional K2. It's also not super short. I mean, this is 39 inches with the stock deployed, 29 with it folded up. And the rails are kind of clutched on aftermarket style. The K1, I think, is super neat. One of my favorite guns I have. But it's antiquated. It goes back to the 70s, and it shows. And it's got a retro charm to my mind. And they're both reliable, and they're both very reasonably accurate for what they are. But they're not exceptionally show in any other way. Although if that original $1,200 price point could be met for the K2S, that's something. There's not a lot of piston AR types on the market for $1,200 if they can meet it. So I ask again, why do you want a Woo? Do you want them for historical reasons? Maybe you're a Korean collector. Maybe you think they look cool. Or are you just a little bit getting swept up into something new? I don't mean to be cynical, but I've seen it before. The IWI Tavor comes to mind. Everyone wanted a Tavor when they were first announced. And then people got them, and they were a perfectly fine gun, but yeah, had their pros and cons. And then the same thing happened with the X95. Everyone's like, okay, well, the original Tavor, it didn't have a great trigger, but oh, this new X95, it's got a better trigger, it's going to be the best thing ever. And then they got them, and they didn't like the accuracy on the X95. They weren't being realistic. Usually people don't have a gun, and they hear about it, they think only about the positives, and they never think about the shortcomings, because every machine has a shortcoming. There's always a trade-off. And when you have all these hopes and dreams on anything, and you get it, it's rarely going to live up to it. On the other hand, if you get something not expecting much and it's great, you're thoroughly impressed. That's literally why I like my Springfield Hellion so much. I picked one up with very little expectation one way or the other, and so I was reasonably impressed. Flip side, when I first got a SCAR, FN SCAR back in the day, I heard all this just wonderful stuff about it, and it was not a bad gun. But I was a little underwhelmed after the new wore off. So why do you want to Woo? Are you going to be able to Woo? What's going on with SNT, USA SNT defense throughout 2025? One thing we can say for sure, we don't have the guns. Otherwise, I'd have some in the video. They were saying we should have something by Q3, Q4 of 25. Not happening. To be fair to them, they never promised all the guns, the four main ones plus others. They just said, maybe something by the end of the year. Well, here's the problem. I think they put the cart before the horse, which is a common thing. I mean, how many things at SHOT Show either come out late or don't come out at all? Random USA. What can we know, though? Well, we can look at government legal documents to see what's happened. They actually didn't apply for SNT Defense as a trade name right up until SHOT Show of this year, so January of 2025. Then in July, they made an update saying, well, we've hit some snags. You know, importation, it's always more work than people realize, even seasoned people. And it's going to take longer than expected. Fair play. Thanks for communicating. Not too long of a wait, but still several months after. Also, that same month, they actually filed for some more trademarks and names and things, including renewing it on the DP51, the K5, which tells me in July, they're really focusing on those pistols for the most part. And as we move into October, that seems to be their main focus. The DP51 pistol, bringing those in again. Of the imports, that's probably the easiest. Also, easy would be parts. The parts kits, if you will, the K2s. That's also something they're still saying we might see before year's end. So the DP51 and the K2 parts kits, not gun. That's still great news for those who own a pre-ban or a DR200. We need parts. And some people might want to take like a DR200 and make it into a K2C clone. That'd be pretty cool, I think. We'll see. So they've kind of narrowed it down. I haven't really heard much about the K13 or the K14. What we do here is that the K2S, the modern version of this, is now expected Q3 or Q4 of 2026. So a year from now. And they say that pre-orders should open up around SHOT Show 2026. So with pre-orders announced, what about the numbers? Well, there's a number of $499.95 for the DP51 pistol. Not bad. I really like the DP51. We did a full video on it at the beginning of the year. Check it out if you haven't. It's a really fun little gun, the safe action, the triple action. I enjoy it. They're really reasonably well-made guns. But there and again, aside from a somewhat unique hammer system, it's another alloy-framed gun. And we've had DP51s before. We had the imports, and then we had the Lionheart guns, the LH9, which we've also done a video on. And then Vulcan, the company, did a version here a few years back, and then there's even some made in the USA inspired by the DP51. So cool, but, you know, it's kind of the least of everything. I don't know how well that's going to sell for them. Again, it's a good gun, but they're also going to be competing with all these Turkish-made high power and Walther clones and all this other stuff, and those guns are $350, $400. Their gun's $500. And it's only a little bit updated from when it used to be in the 90s. So, I don't know. I think the K2 parts are definitely sell well, but not many pre-ban and DR200 post-ban type imports really came in. So, how big is that market? There's definitely one, but I don't know. So, that gets us to the K2S and its price point. Now, after people kind of thought about it a bit, that $1,200 thing kind of slowly rose to about $1,500. This is all forums talk. Am I getting a little bit of HD18 vibes, or people kind of throwing their own price point on? Yeah, a little bit. Because now the number of $1,799.95 seems to be applied to the K2S, so $1,800. However, with some big asterisks and caveats about tariffs and import costs, I bet it's $2,000, guys. At least, you know, retail price, maybe not dealer. Are you interested at $2,000? Let me know. I'm curious, because at that price point, you're competing with some pretty high-end guns, various CZs and FNs and whatever else you can think of. So I'm curious to see who would still be interested. I understand why the 1200 was attractive. Is almost double that still attractive? Why do you want to woo? What about bringing back the K1A? I don't think that's going to happen. I could see them bringing over some remaining K1A stocks, Maybe when the guns do retire, rebuilding them on semi-automatic receivers, perhaps. But they haven't actually made the K1A as a wholly new gun in a number of years. I don't think SNT and South Korea would want to tool up to make the complete parts set for a gun they're no longer offering and haven't done for, I don't know when the last new K1A came off the assembly line, but if you tell me it was the 90s, it wouldn't shock me. I know they're still, making parts, barrels, handguards, that kind of thing, but, the K13 is probably more likely of the two because that's its modern replacement, but it does seem like S&T Defense USA has kind of quietly stopped talking about the K13 and the K14. I don't blame them. Focus on the K2 and its surrounding parts because that's what most people are going to want. That's going to be your bread and butter seller. And do the DP51 if you want, because it'll be an easy way to say, hey, look, we are delivering something to market. We're legitimate. And that gets me to, where is the company at right now? What work has been done? What work is left to do to woo? Is at least a real company. Actually, there's two of them. You have S&T Defense, located at 1001 Park Run Drive in Las Vegas. But this is not the factory. This is a legal entity. This is kind of an office, a mailing address, paperwork stuff, white collar stuff. But there is another address that is associated with an actual factory. That is at 1850 East Mall Avenue, also in Las Vegas. The first one was established towards the end of 2023, and the FFL was granted in 2024 because they do have an import FFL, a manufacturing FFL. It's valid through 2027. Our FFLs expire every 3 years. So those do exist. I did find a contact name, a manager's name of Eric Jin Wook Choi. So that's good. We have a name. There's also a law firm representing them out of California. That's all on paper. That's all filed. That's good to go. What's the status of the factory, though? Now, again, they're going to import a great number of parts, and they're going to seek subcontractors in America. Chances are they're going to make a lot of things in-house, and so therefore the factory is going to be an assembler. That's not uncommon. It happens all the time. This is where we hit a little bit of a road bump. Public records do not really show a workforce being hired. Now, I'm sure they have more than just 2 employees. I'm sure there are people. But we're not seeing advertisements in Nevada for skilled workers, machinists, what have you. All the other things you need with a factory. We're not seeing employment records. Typically, in a company gets big enough, you'll see number of employees, and we don't see that yet. And we don't even see hiring ads out yet. And considering they were still applying for trademarks and setting things up this year, they are probably just not there yet. In fact, there was some evidence of them still seeking U.S. companies to produce parts for them as a subcontractor, as sort of, for example, a plastics company, a polymer company to make handguards or pistol grips. I should also just mention briefly that while the steel mags were common back in the day, South Korea has long since gone over to making polymer mags. I mean, South Korea makes every mag under the planet. They clone all of them, so no shock there. In fact, this is current mag too. So here's my thing. They've made progress this year. They have. And they're directly associated with SNT Motiv South Korea. So that's good. There shouldn't be any trouble there. But will they be able to deliver anything by the end of this year or even next year? To me, it still feels like they're in the setup phase, the wind-up phase. And here we are almost a year down the road. They definitely don't have a factory up and running with parts ready to go. Now, they don't really need that for the DP51 pistol or if they just want to sell K2 parts. But if they want to do a rifle like this, they're going to need to have U.S. parts and someone to put them together and do quality control and warranty, repair, return stuff, and all that good stuff. And right now they seem to still be in the setup phase and the marketing phase. That's not even considering the U.S. government and what they may or may not do. Obviously, the tariffs, which is an ongoing thing, all year they've been no, yes, and then they do them, and then they're going to make cutouts, and then who knows. How are the tariffs going to affect parts or firearms out of South Korea? I don't know. And anyone who tells you they know for sure, they're talking out their butt, because no one knows. And even if not, that's got to make importers more skittish. It's certainly made the market more volatile, I can tell you that. The U.S. government can let guns in, customs, ATF, tech branch, or not. And you have to get import approval for everything, not just full, complete firearms, but any parts, anything, slings, whatever, needs approval. Sometimes it's just pro forma. There you go. Other times they'll block it for no reason that you can discern. And you might be thinking, what about the Second Amendment? What about my rights? You don't have any rights when it comes to imports. You have some rights when it comes to gun ownership. But as to where those guns come from, domestic is more protected. Imports, and this isn't just guns, but anything. I don't care what you do. Imports are very volatile. They're basically at the pleasure, at the discretion of the government. And this is how it's always been since time immemorial. Who knows if there'll be any roadblocks there? I certainly don't. Maybe SNT Defense has all the forms and all the paperwork done. Maybe they do. If they don't, though, again, rate them USA. Just as a cautionary tale. I think they're smarter than that, though. I'll give them credit. However, do I need to remind you about those PINDAD FNCs that were the talk of the SHOT Show 2024? Again, so many things in SHOT Show either come in late or don't come in at all or come in at a higher price point. Or, heaven forbid, what if they don't come in perfect? People treat the K2 and the K1 like they're perfection, and they're great made guns. Now, I wasn't buying guns. I was alive, but I wasn't buying guns back when these came in. I was a little too young. I'm sure there were some warranty repair issues. I'm sure there were some defective products. And if they come in again, we're going to see it once more. How often have you heard people talk about how great a gun is, and the minute the internet posts a bad rivet, or claims of a bad heat treat, or claims of a barrel that's not accurate, or any other myriad issues, and it flips like that? See what I'm saying? There will be lemons. How well will people tolerate it when there's a bad K2 out there? Or a DP51 that has a cracked frame? Just as a thing. Do not expect 100% perfection. Because just like every other gun, you're going to meet an issue here or there. And that's not even talking about the modern made parts. Keep in mind, these were made in the 80s with 80s parts. Things have changed. In some ways, manufacturing's gotten better. It really has. But who's to say what current day S&T specs are going to be like? Even if they're crackerjack, who's to say what the standards of S&T defense in Las Vegas are going to be like? Who knows? And at that, who's to say about the subcontractors that they source from? What if they do all their part perfectly, but one of their subcontractors, let's say for a gas piston, let's say they go that way for a U.S. part, or a trigger group component, if they go that way for a U.S. part. What if one of the manufacturers gets a spec off, doesn't heat treat right, and there's an issue there? Again, just think about all the companies that do okay, and then something goes wonky, and the internet turns on them, because the internet's going to internet, and that's what they're going to do. And then what are you going to hear? Oh, the new ones aren't as good as the old ones. To which I basically say, bullshit. If they come to market, I bet they'll be perfectly fine, even good. I really do. But I could be wrong on that, because I don't know. I don't have them, you don't have them either. But I guarantee you, at least some forums online will claim that the old ones were better for some magical reason, because we see this every time an 80s pre-band gets reinvented in the 21st century. I've seen it a lot with the Zastava AKs, that somehow the Mitchell's guns, the National Arms guns, were better than the current Zastava USA. I've had both. Aside from a little bit of cosmetic niceties on the pre-bands, I think the bones are perfectly fine. I've never had trouble with modern Zastava. But some will, and that's another thing too, economy of scale. Like I said, 1,500 of these came in. When you're only making that small of a number over a several year period, but modern manufacturing and consumerism kind of dictates you import as much as you can to keep costs down. So let's say we just bring 15,000 in. You've just multiplied your chances of failure by 10. That's kind of what's happened with Zastava USA. I don't think they have a very high failure rate at all. It's just that they're importing in larger numbers than they ever have before. So if SNT Defense makes a good go of it, cool. I'm happy for it. But you're going to hear about more failures, even if the percentage has gone down. Let's say the original failure rate was 1% in the 80s. It could be 0.5% today, but with current import numbers, you're going to hear about more, and that's not even thinking about the internet, the ability to share faults. I'm trying to give you a realistic point of view of what is going to happen if these come in. If. So, is it going to happen? No one knows the future. I think it's nice that they posted a couple of updates this year, but they're a year behind schedule already. And if you want to do this, they're $500-$600 already over cost, and both of those numbers could expand even further. Who knows what this will actually be like? Well, I asked ChatGPT just for fun. I pretty much fed it all the stuff I've told you. And I wanted two numbers. First, what is the likelihood SNT USA will deliver at least one or two products, firearms, parts, whatever? It gave an 80% chance. Okay, not too bad. Obviously, the DP51 and K2 parts were pretty high likelihood. The next thing I asked it was, what's the chance that SNT USA will deliver all or most of the products shown off at SHOT Show and discussed? So the K13, the K14, maybe a K2C pistol, the K2S rifle, all the parts, variations of the K5, maybe even reintroduce the K1A. 40% is what it gave. And of course it gives its little robot logic, but it was all stuff that we've already talked about in the video. So there you go. I am not saying I agree or disagree. I just thought it would be fun to ask. I don't know. It's sometimes interesting posing stuff with AI for what it is. This wouldn't trust it to do my taxes, I'd tell you that for sure. I do have to concur, though. I think we will probably see something out of SNT, but I don't know what it'll be. It could just be parts. The thing is, and they're not unique in this, but it drives me nuts every time. Why release at a SHOT Show a year before you know you're ready? I definitely prefer launches like how Springfield did the Kuna this year. We didn't even hear about it till like 6 weeks before it would hit the market. That's how I like things. A little bit of forewarning, but I'd rather you have all your ducks in a row before talking. Now I know business-wise, PR-wise, there's issues with that. I do. I just don't like it. But I think we'll see the pistols, parts. Do I think they'll make it before the end of 2025? No. But I could be wrong. They could sneak in at the tail end of Christmas. Heck, Zastava did that last year. They promised the ZPAP M72 by the end of 2024. They did, like, 2 days before the end, but technically they did it. So if we do see anything out of SNT USA, it'll be a, well, technically, it was in 2025. Now, there's a lot of speculation there's going to be major talks there at 2026 at SHOT Show. And talk about doing pre-orders on the K2Ss. I'd like to see it. But if they're already projecting Q3, Q4, and don't even have a 100% firm price point yet, and if we don't even see them having a fully staffed factory yet, again, if you are near there and are near the 1850 East Mall Avenue address and can report, oh yeah, there's 50 guys in there working at machines, I would love to hear it. I just couldn't find any evidence of it myself. But if you have it, awesome sauce. Let me know. I think we would be very lucky to see much more, even in 2026. I do not think the K13 is coming anytime soon, even though that might be the one that I'd be most interested in. I think the K14, if they want to do it, is more likely, simply because importing a bolt action is pretty easy. But having seen other modern kind of precision bolt action imports, don't be shocked if the price point's pretty dang high. It seems like when the guns like that come in, they're pretty dang spendy. So they may not want to do it because there's not money in there. I have a feeling they're going to be focusing on the K2 and maybe some derivatives. And I wish them well. But I wouldn't be holding my breath. If it comes, it comes. And if it doesn't, well, it's just yet another one that didn't quite make it. And again, as I've said throughout the video, why do you want to woo? I know why I do. I would buy one of the current ones if it's a little different. I'd love to have a K2C1 type or a K13. But I'm a collector. That's what I do. I don't expect them to be better. If you're a modern firearms person, there are probably much more advanced designs to check out at the show, or much more economical and frankly standard parts compatible AR-15s all over the place. This gun is entering into a very crowded market, and I don't know if that price point keeps going up, how well it'll do, frankly. Those are just my thoughts and my speculation. Do I think my original video has aged like milk? No, I do not. I actually think it aged very well. We do not have the guns. We do not have a definitive timeline when we will see the guns. We do not have a price point except perhaps on the DP51, which is not the one most people are clamoring for, even though, again, I think it's a good gun. My video has aged exactly like I said it would. Don't hold your breath in. I was very skeptical we'd see anything in 2025. I still am, with the caveat, maybe, just because they filed for trademarks and they do have an active FFL and 2 active addresses, they can get some imports done. But I mean, heck, we're almost into December. Time's running out. I will also tell you that none of my distributors as an FFL are showing SNT Defense, SNT USA is one of their suppliers. And that's typically what, in their computers, they're organized by importer, manufacturer, Century Arms, all that stuff. None of them are showing them. And there's been stuff. There's even SKUs popping up for like the HKC36 and things like that. That's not happening yet. It could happen tomorrow after I record this. Who knows? But I think best case, we might see some stuff a year from now. Maybe. Here's the thing, though. So much could happen in South Korea, in Las Vegas with all the private stuff, in Washington, D.C. Who knows? Who knows? And the gun market this year, I've had other dealers tell me this is the worst they've ever seen it, guys that have been in the game a long time. I'm not going to say that. For me, it's been an okay year. Not great, but, you know, what do you do? It's not a good time to be introducing a whole new product line, I'll tell you that. You'll get the initial people buying. What happens after that first wave? And the guys at SNT have to be mindful of that too. At the very least, though, I'm hopeful for spare parts, and I'll happily buy those. I also wouldn't mind some Korean mags and, you know, some maybe updated accessories. If nothing else, to kind of take the place of the now defunct Daewoo parts.com, that pretty cool website that we used to have. Right, Miss Peanut? I know it. We're about done, aren't we, good girl? So that's what we think. That's what's going on. I'd love to hear any more info you've got. I did my best to look into it, but I didn't go super exhaustive. And I do wish the guys in Vegas the best. But it's always an uphill battle with gun manufacturing, and you make it even more difficult when you involve importation. Even though they are backed by a large conglomerate like SNT Motiv with militaries behind them. That does help. That really does help, having military stuff. But will it be enough? We'll all find out together. So there we have it. We've updated the Woo, talking about the current K2C1s, the K1A C1s, such as they are. One is on the way out, and one is still going strong even with the updates. Also talked about my opinions, and for that matter, the fun little ChatGPT analysis of the likelihood of SNT Defense, SNT USA, of delivering one or many products. Do you agree with me? Do you think the K2 stuff will probably come along with the K5 stuff? But are you also skeptical about the more exotic versions, like the K1A derivatives and the K13 and all that? Let me know. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong. And again, by the time you watch this video, things could have very well changed. But I know this is something that interests people, and it interests me too, because they're really fun and interesting guns, and it is great to hear talk about it. And I don't want to be a negative person. I just want to be realistic, and I want people to have realistic expectations. Besides, it's always better to be pleasantly surprised than harshly disappointed, I would say. And now that we've talked about South Korea, and since this is the Mishaco channel, next time, let's talk about this rifle's direct opponent across the border. What North Korea, the DRPK, is going with since the late 60s. The Type 68 and other AK-derived variants. Because this was another cool one that we got. Obviously, not a pure import. Kit build. And getting these parts kits was something, well, I think we're all thankful for too. So, to kind of continue on Thanksgiving week, we'll talk about North Korean Kalashnikovs and how I really do dig my Asian contract build here, wear and tear and all. Of course, these are chambered for 7.62 by 39. North Korea does also use 5.45 by 39, but as of now, those kits, not to mention rifles, are not available here. But that's a story for the next video. If you liked this one on the Daewoos, the SNT Motiv, SNT Defense, SNT USA situation, if you could, please do comment, at least like the video, share it with a buddy. You could always do a super thanks if you found it useful. And you could always go over and check out Patreon if you'd like to help support us during this holiday season. With that, on behalf of Miss Peanut and her sister, Well, I'll catch you very soon next time.